A stranger was on my lawn, claiming she now owned my property. She said my mailbox was a violation and I was required to join her HOA. But my house wasn't even in her neighborhood. This was the start of a campaign of fake legal threats, police calls, and drone surveillance. What she didn't know was that her attempt to steal my home would end with her in prison. Her name was Karen Ridley, and the first time I saw her, she was standing on my front lawn as if she had just planted a flag there and claimed it for her own kingdom. She held a clipboard like a scepter and wore a smug tilt to her chin that could curdle milk. "This is a violation," she snapped, her voice sharp and grating. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my mailbox, a sturdy, custom-built wooden box that had been there since my grandfather built the house. "It doesn't meet HOA standards for the neighborhood." I blinked, taking a slow sip of my morning coffee. The steam curled into the cool morning air. "What? HOA?" I asked, genuinely confused. She scoffed, a little puff of condescending air, as if I'd just asked her if the sky was blue. "The Willow Bend Homeowners Association. You're required to join." I leaned on my fence post, a solid piece of oak that had weathered a dozen winters, and crossed my arms. The wood felt familiar and solid under my hand. "I'm not in Willow Bend," I said, my voice even. "This house is on Maple Ridge. It's a whole separate subdivision, has been for 50 years. Karen's eyes, small and hard, narrowed into slits. "That's what the previous owner claimed, too," she said, tapping her clipboard with a pen. "But we recently expanded our jurisdiction. The board voted on it last month." A slow smile spread across my face, the kind that never reaches your eyes. "Let me stop you right there," I said, turning and reaching behind a porch column. I pulled out a thick manila folder, already prepared for this exact conversation. I had a feeling it was coming. "I've got the original plat map from 1978, the official county records for this parcel, and a signed and notarized letter from the county zoning office confirming my property is not, and has never been, under your HOA's jurisdiction. So, no, I'm not joining. And no, I'm not changing my mailbox." Karen's face twitched. It was a fascinating little micro-expression, a flicker of disbelief followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. She was clearly not a woman accustomed to being told no, especially by someone with proof. The clipboard in her hand trembled slightly. "I'll give you until Friday," she snapped, her voice tight with fury. She spun on her heel, her sensible shoes digging into my lawn, and stormed back to the golf cart parked at the curb, a chariot for her suburban tyranny. "Then we'll handle this the proper way." I watched her drive off, the little electric motor whining in protest. I thought that was the end of it. A simple misunderstanding, corrected with facts and documents. It wasn't. It was just the beginning. Friday came, a bright, clear morning. I was on the porch, enjoying the quiet with a second cup of coffee, when the tranquility was shattered by the sight of two police cruisers pulling up outside my house. Their lights weren't flashing, but their presence was an alarm bell. I set down my mug just as three officers stepped out, their expressions grim and professional. "Are you Xavier Jensen?" one of them asked, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Yeah," I said, standing up. "What's this about?" "We got a call from the Willow Bend HOA. They said you were trespassing and refusing to leave the property." I blinked, the absurdity of the statement washing over me. "I live here," I said, gesturing to the house behind me. Just then, like a villain emerging from the shadows, Karen came bustling out of nowhere. She must have been waiting behind a neighbor's meticulously trimmed hedge. "Officers, that's him," she declared, pointing at me with all the drama of a star witness in a courtroom drama. "He's refusing to comply with HOA directives. His presence is disruptive to the entire neighborhood." The lead officer gave her a look that was a masterclass in professional patience. "Ma'am, this isn't an HOA enforcement issue. You called and said he was trespassing." "He is," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "This property belongs to the association now. We voted to annex it. It's in the minutes." I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was a genuine, out-loud laugh that seemed to echo in the quiet street. "You can't just vote to steal someone's house, Karen. That's not how property law, or reality, works." Her face turned a shade of crimson I'd previously only seen in cartoons. The officers exchanged tired glances, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. I walked back to the porch and grabbed my folder again. It was becoming my most valuable possession. "Here's the documentation from the county and the zoning board." I said, handing the papers to the officer who had first spoken. My address is outside of their jurisdiction. I've already filed a formal complaint with the county about her harassment. The officer took the papers, his eyes skimming the official letterhead and stamped seals. He read them, then looked up at Karen, his expression now firm. Ma'am, you can't call emergency services for HOA disputes. That's a misuse of public resources. But he's refusing to cooperate, she sputtered. That's not a criminal matter, the officer said, his voice dropping a note. But if you do this again, he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. You could be charged with filing a false report. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. The officer handed my folder back to me. Have a good day, sir, he said, then turned and walked back to his cruiser with his partners. Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk for a moment, then stomped off without another word, her righteous indignation deflating like a punctured balloon. The officers drove away, but the air still felt heavy. That wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a declaration of war, and my quiet street was the battlefield. I knew this wasn't over. I was right. Sunday morning started with a high-pitched, insistent buzzing. It was the sound of a drone flying low over my backyard. I stepped out onto the deck in my slippers, coffee in one hand, a pair of binoculars in the other. The little machine, a consumer-grade quadcopter with a camera gimbal, hovered just over my fence line, its lens pointed directly at my patio. It was the sound of my privacy being shredded. Watching that little spy camera hover over my fence, I didn't just feel angry, I felt invaded. I tracked its flight path with the binoculars as it zipped back toward Willow Bend, finally landing neatly in the backyard of 423 Juniper Lane, Karen's house. By noon, I'd been to the electronics store. I installed a motion-activated camera on the back fence, aimed at the sky. I wasn't about to let her build some fabricated case against me out of cherry-picked drone footage. For good measure, I also logged onto the FAA's website and forwarded the incident, complete with time, date, and her address, to their drone complaint system. If she was going to get clever, I was going to get official. Monday, I came home from a long day at work to find a neon orange sticker slapped across my front door. It was large, garish, and impossible to miss. Notice of non-compliance. It screamed in bold black letters. Non-member violation. I peeled it off carefully, making sure not to tear it, photographed it next to a ruler for scale, and opened my mailbox. The assault continued. Inside were 2 more letters from the Willow Bend HOA. One was a fabricated final warning, citing a list of made-up bylaws and threatening to place a lien on my property. The other was an invitation to a mandatory compliance hearing, whatever that was supposed to mean. The letterhead on both documents featured a gold seal that looked vaguely official, clearly designed to intimidate. I called the county clerk's office the next morning. A helpful woman named Brenda listened patiently as I explained the situation. They can't file liens on properties outside their jurisdiction, she said definitively after reviewing the parcel number in her system. It would be rejected instantly, and they definitely can't hold a mandatory hearing involving you. Can you do anything about the notice? I asked. Not directly, she replied. But if they're impersonating a legal authority with that seal, that's a criminal issue. Document everything. I'll notify the sheriff's office to start a file. The campaign of harassment escalated on Wednesday. My doorbell rang, and I found a man in a cheap, ill-fitting Navy suit standing on my porch. Mr. Jensen? He asked, already reaching for a roll of blueprints he had tucked under his arm. I'm with the Maple Ridge Compliance Committee. We're here to inspect your landscaping before the annexation is finalized. I stared at him, my expression flat. There is no annexation, and there is no Maple Ridge Compliance Committee. He blinked, his confidence wavering. I was told this was already voted on. I stepped fully onto the porch and held up my phone, making sure the red recording light was visible. You're trespassing. I'm recording this. State your full name and the organization you're claiming to represent. He hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. Greg Withers. I'm a contractor. They hired me to do inspections. Who's they? I pressed. He looked down at his shoes. The Willow Bend HOA. And did they tell you my property was legally part of their jurisdiction? Well, yeah, he mumbled. I pointed toward the edge of my driveway. You can leave now, or I can call the sheriff who is already investigating this HOA. Your choice. He didn't argue. He just gathered his blueprints and left, muttering something about not being paid enough for this. That night, I drove to the sheriff's department and filed a formal report, adding the recording of Greg Withers to the growing pile of evidence. Apparently, I wasn't the only one. Two other homeowners on the east side of Maple Ridge, the side that bordered Willow Bend, reported similar visits. One of them, a single mom with two kids, had her backyard gate opened without permission while her children were playing. The department officially launched a formal inquiry. Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was Detective Lena Harlow. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice all business. "I've been assigned to investigate a number of complaints involving the Willow Bend HOA. Would you be willing to meet and provide your documentation?" "Absolutely," I agreed immediately. We met that afternoon at the precinct. The station was a whirlwind of activity, but her office was a small island of calm. I handed over a newly organized binder containing printouts of the zoning maps, the drone footage saved to a thumb drive, the fake orange notice, and the letter threatening a lien. She skimmed through the papers, her expression hardening with each page she turned. "They forged this," she said, pointing to the letterhead on the compliance notice. "This seal is only used by registered municipal offices. It's a Class C misdemeanor to replicate it. They're using it to pressure non-members," I said. She nodded slowly, a grim look on her face. "That's criminal impersonation. And if they're attempting to create false liens, that's fraud." I leaned forward, my hands clasped on her desk. "Can they be prosecuted?" "If we can prove intent and a pattern of behavior, yes," she confirmed. "But it'll take more than just your case to convince the DA to press charges." I paused, thinking of my neighbors. "I know of two other homes they've targeted. I can connect you." "Do that," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "And keep your exterior cameras rolling. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes." By Friday afternoon, Karen was back, knocking on my door again. This time, she brought a friend. He was a man in a rumpled gray blazer with a sour expression. "This is our legal counsel, Mr. Dverl," she announced, waving toward him as if he were a celebrity. She showed up with her so-called legal counsel. But the moment I mentioned one specific name, his professional demeanor shattered. "I'm here to serve you with a cease and desist," Dverl said in a monotone voice, handing me an envelope. I tore it open right there on the porch. "You're accusing me of harassment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I read the frivolous claims. "You've been spreading misinformation about the HOA," he replied flatly. "It's damaging our reputation in the community." I held up my phone again, the camera already recording. "Say that again, clearly." "I'm sending this entire conversation directly to Detective Harlow at the Sheriff's Department." Dverl froze. His Adam's apple bobbed. Karen's eyes darted nervously to the street, as if looking for an escape route. "You've both been reported for impersonating government officials, issuing fraudulent notices, and trespassing with surveillance equipment," I said, my voice low and steady. "You want to escalate this? Be my guest. Add witness intimidation to the list." Dverl muttered something about needing to review new developments in the case and practically dragged a protesting Karen away from my porch. She protested the whole way down the walk, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. That weekend, things escalated fast, but not in their favor. Multiple Maple Ridge residents received similar compliance letters, all featuring the fake county seal. One family had their trash bins tagged with bright yellow stickers reading "unauthorized placement," citing a rule that didn't exist in either neighborhood. The net was widening, and they were getting sloppy. Detective Harlow organized a town hall meeting at the community center on Tuesday night. It was packed. The room buzzed with anger and confusion. Harlow stood at the front with a projector displaying side-by-side images of the fake notices and actual county documents. Her voice was calm but firm, cutting through the noise. "What the Willow Bend HOA has done is not only unethical, it's criminal," she announced to the silent room. "They've impersonated county departments, fabricated jurisdictional authority, and initiated fraudulent claims against private citizens." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. A man from the back stood up. "Can we press charges? If you received any false notices, trespassing visits, or drone surveillance?" "Yes," Harlow confirmed. "File a report. We're building a comprehensive case." Then I stepped forward. It wasn't just me anymore. It was a retired teacher, a young couple, a disabled veteran. Over 20 people stood up that night with their own folders, their own evidence, their own stories. We weren't just a list of complaints. We were a coalition. I've got footage, documents, audio recordings, and 3 witnesses, I said, my voice carrying across the room. They tried to forcibly annex my home and used threats when I refused. More residents came forward, their courage contagious. Some have been too intimidated to speak up until now. A retired school teacher described how Karen had cornered her in the grocery store, telling her that non-compliant homes would lose access to shared roads. A young couple revealed that they'd been scared into paying over $500 in bogus pre-annexation dues after repeated threats. By the end of the meeting, over 20 people had lined up to sign official statements. Detective Harlow and another officer collected every last one. The sheriff's department moved fast after that. They executed a search warrant at the Willow Bend HOA office, which was really just a converted pool house with a desk and a filing cabinet. Inside, they found exactly what they were looking for: stacks of pre-printed notices with the forged seal, fake zoning maps with red lines crudely drawn to include parts of Maple Ridge, and a spreadsheet brazenly labeled expansion compliance targets. Karen was arrested the next morning at her home. So was Dverl. A quick check of his credentials revealed he wasn't even a licensed attorney, just a disgraced paralegal who had been disbarred years ago for misconduct and was trying to build his own shady practice. The local news picked up the story within hours. The headline read, "Fake HOA expansion scandal rocks Willow Bend. Residents fight back against fraud." I watched the segment from my living room, sipping coffee from the same mug I had been holding the day the drone first appeared. One of the reporters interviewed a woman I'd never met before. She lived on the far end of Maple Ridge. "They went after the wrong guy," she said with a grin. "He didn't just push back, he brought the whole thing down." I didn't grin. I just nodded and walked outside to take the notice of non-compliance sticker out of the evidence folder. Then I lit the grill. It was going to be a good dinner. I thought putting Karen in cuffs was the end of it. I was wrong. The phone call that changed everything came from a name I hadn't seen in years, my old high school buddy, who was now the deputy district attorney, Samuel Ray. He'd been 2 years ahead of me, a quiet, brilliant kid who I mostly remembered for helping me not fail chemistry. "I saw your name in the HOA fraud case," he said, his voice deeper but still familiar. "I'm overseeing the prosecution." I leaned back in the driver's seat of my truck, parked outside the feed store. Didn't expect to get a call from someone I used to cheat off in chemistry. He chuckled. "You passed, didn't you?" "Barely." "Well, now you're passing out subpoenas, apparently. I need you to come in next week. There's more going on here than just fake notices and unauthorized surveillance." We pulled their financials. That got my attention. When I walked into his office Monday morning, Samuel didn't look like the kid who used to wear a hoodie to class. He wore a crisp gray suit, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and his desk was an organized storm of printouts, transaction records, and scanned receipts. He spun his monitor toward me. "You're not going to believe this," he said. What I saw wasn't just bullying. It was a sophisticated financial crime, and my house was at the center of it. A massive spreadsheet filled the screen, littered with vendor names I didn't recognize, payment entries, and line items labeled with vague terms like community development reserve and legal compliance fees. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Over $70,000 in misappropriated funds," he said, tapping the screen. "They were collecting dues from Willow Bend residents and funneling the money into fake shell companies." "Let me guess," I said. "Those companies don't actually exist." "A couple do." Karen had one registered under her brother's name, another under a vacant lot in a different county. Her so-called legal counsel, Dverl, was siphoning 5% off every legal services retainer without ever filing a single legitimate case. I shook my head. The audacity of it all was stunning. And they still had time to harass people outside their neighborhood. Samuel leaned forward, his expression intense. "That's the thing. They were running out of money. The annexation was a last-ditch scheme to expand their dues base and bring in fresh cash. You refusing to join and then fighting back made their whole desperate plan unravel." He handed me a folder. "We're filing charges for mail fraud, embezzlement, impersonation of government officials, and unlawful surveillance. You'll be called as a material witness. We also need your original footage and documents for evidence." "Done," I said. "But I've got something else for you." I told him about a neighbor who, after his gate was tampered with, had installed a trail cam. It caught a man in a reflective vest opening the gate and taking photos of the backyard. Send it to me, Samuel said. If we can prove they were operating as a coordinated group to intimidate residents, that's a conspiracy charge. 2 weeks later, the court unsealed the indictment. 9 charges against Karen, 5 against the fake paralegal, and civil suits pending against 3 other HOA board members who had blindly voted for the illegal expansion. The residents of Maple Ridge were safe from annexation, but Willowbend was in chaos. I tried to keep to myself, but one day a woman named Lorraine knocked on my door. She had short silver hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and held a folded newspaper under her arm. "You're Jensen, right?" she asked. "That's me. I'm the interim president of the Willowbend HOA. The residents voted to dissolve the current board. You caused quite the shake-up." I stepped onto the porch. I didn't mean to shake anything up. I just didn't want to get dragged into their circus. "We're grateful you pushed back," she said sincerely. "But there's something else. We found a storage unit rented under the HOA's name. It's filled with documents that shouldn't exist." I frowned. "Like what?" "Applications to purchase land outside Willowbend, including several lots in Maple Ridge that were never for sale. Some have forged signatures from the property owners." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "Mine. Yours was right on top." I stared at her, a cold anger settling in my gut. "You're saying they tried to buy my land using forged documents?" "Not just yours. 7 properties in Maple Ridge. They had a plan to present these fraudulent purchases as legitimate and then file with the county to rezone the parcels into Willowbend's jurisdiction. Except they didn't own any of them," I finished. "Exactly," she said. I ran a hand over my jaw. "That's not just fraud. That's attempted grand theft." She nodded grimly. "We're handing all the documents over to the DA this week." The next time I saw Samuel, he was standing on the courthouse steps, giving a press statement. I caught the tail end of it as I approached. "These individuals didn't just bend the rules," he was saying to a scrum of reporters. "They built a whole system designed to deceive their neighbors, manipulate authority, and steal property under the guise of community governance." When he finished, I handed him a flash drive. "Lorraine gave me copies of everything they found," I said, "including a spreadsheet labeled Annexation Rollout Schedule, complete with names, lot sizes, and projected dues." Samuel took it, his jaw set. "This just keeps getting worse." "Tell me about it," I replied. The trial was scheduled for the following month. The evidence was overwhelming. But on the day of the sentencing, Karen had one last surprise that showed the true depth of her scheme. Before the judge could rule, Samuel introduced the new evidence from the storage unit. He showed the jury the forged property applications and the detailed rollout schedule. It wasn't just a desperate plan for cash. It was a premeditated conspiracy to steal our homes. During the trial's opening week, the courtroom was packed. Local news cameras lined the back wall. I sat in the front row watching as Karen, now dressed like a department store mannequin instead of a suburban dictator, avoided everyone's gaze. Samuel laid out the case methodically. He showed the jury the forged liens, the altered county maps, and the digital trail of misused funds. One by one, my neighbors testified about the threats, the false police calls, and the retaliatory drones. The prosecutor's favorite exhibit was a wire transfer he had uncovered, labeled Expansion Bonus, sent from the HOA account to a private account in Florida registered to Karen. When it was my turn to take the stand, I kept it simple. "I didn't want to fight," I said, looking directly at the jury. "I just wanted to be left alone." But they wouldn't stop. They used fake documents, called the police on me under false pretenses, and tried to scare me into compliance. I wasn't the only one. They thought nobody would stand up to them. They were wrong. By the time I stepped down, I could feel the tide had turned in the room. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Guilty. Every single charge stuck. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Karen got 5 years in state prison and a hefty restitution order. Her fake legal partner got 3 years and a permanent ban from ever working in any legal-adjacent field again. The other board members were fined heavily and barred from ever holding an official position in a residential community. Samuel met me outside the courthouse afterward. "You ever think about running for city council?" he asked with a slight grin. I laughed. "I'd rather herd wild raccoons." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. The system needs more people who won't back down." I watched him walk off, then turned toward the parking lot. "Same truck, same lot, but everything felt different. Back in Maple Ridge, folks had started talking about forming a neighborhood council, not an HOA, but a residents group focused on community safety and shared resources. I wasn't interested in running it, but I did volunteer to help folks set up security cameras and track down zoning records. One afternoon, as I was helping a neighbor mount a motion light, he looked over and said, "You know, we all thought you were just the quiet guy with the old truck." I shrugged. "Still am." He grinned. "Yeah, but now you're also the guy who took down the HOA." I didn't argue. Just tightened the last screw, flipped the breaker, and watched the light flicker on. No more drone shadows. No more fake notices. No more clipboard tyrants. Just neighbors in peace. The leaves had turned from green to gold by the time the final hearing ended, and Maple Ridge was quieter than it had been in months. Just when I thought the dust had finally settled, two people from the state auditor's office showed up at my door. A black SUV pulled into my driveway, and out stepped a man in a state inspector's windbreaker and a woman with a badge clipped to her belt. The rabbit hole of corruption we'd uncovered was far deeper than any of us ever imagined. "Mr. Jensen?" the woman asked. I nodded, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "You folks lost, or just really late to the party?" She offered a thin, professional smile. "Not quite. We're following up on a tip from the district attorney's office. During discovery, they uncovered documentation suggesting that the Willow Bend HOA may have accessed state grant funds under false pretenses." I tossed the rag over my shoulder. "What kind of funds?" "Community development grants," she explained. "They claim to be working on infrastructure upgrades, sidewalk paving, storm water runoff improvements, that sort of thing. They secured nearly $200,000 over 3 years. And let me guess," I said, "none of that money ever made it past their office door." She didn't answer directly, but the inspector spoke for the first time. "We're trying to trace where it went. Given your involvement in the original case, we were hoping you might have seen or heard anything else, anything that didn't come up during the trial." I gestured for them to come inside. "I've got a box in the back closet. Never got around to handing it over to the DA. Thought it might be overkill, but now I'm glad I didn't toss it." Inside my house, I slid a plastic tote labeled HOA Nonsense in black duct tape onto the kitchen table. I pulled out a binder I hadn't touched since midsummer. It contained the minutes from one of the so-called compliance hearings Karen's group had tried to hold. I'd gotten them from a neighbor who worked in IT and had intercepted a shared drive link they'd accidentally sent to the wrong email address. The inspector flipped through the first few pages, his eyes scanning the detailed entries. Then he stopped. "This says they allocated $15,000 to storm drain expansion on Ridgeview Lane." I leaned against the counter. "There's no Ridgeview Lane in Willow Bend. That's 2 miles east, in another township entirely." The woman with the badge kept reading. "Another $20,000 for ADA sidewalk compliance near the community center. Is there any record of sidewalk upgrades?" "Not unless they considered spray painting over the cracks an upgrade," I said. She closed the binder slowly, her eyes meeting her partner's. "This is enough for us to open a full investigation. If even half of this is accurate, it's not just fraud. It's misappropriation of state funds, falsification of grant applications, and possibly money laundering. You're going to need warrants," I said. They kept receipts in a locked closet behind the HOA office. I saw them once during the town hall, blue accordion folders, all marked with different project names. The inspector nodded. "Appreciate the tip, Mr. Jensen. This just got a lot bigger than we expected." 2 days later, the state auditor's office served a search warrant on the now padlocked Willow Bend HOA office. What they found made the original case look like petty theft. There were invoices from shell companies that didn't exist, receipts with digitally altered dates, and even a signed letter authorizing the transfer of funds from the grant account to a personal checking account under Karen's maiden name. Some receipts were for outlandish things like community wellness consulting at $5,000 a session. The consultant's address was a P.O. box in Nevada. The state filed new charges within the week. This time, they went after not just Karen and her fake legal sidekick, but also a former treasurer from the HOA board who had quietly moved to Oregon. He was arrested at a rest stop outside Eugene. Samuel called me again, this time from his car on the way back from a meeting with the state attorney general. "They're treating this as a Tier 2 corruption case now," he said, the sound of the highway humming in the background. "It's not just theft. They use state money to fund a private scheme to illegally seize property. That's not just local crime anymore. So what's the play? I asked. They're freezing all assets tied to the HOA. Homes purchased under false authority, vehicles bought with grant funds. It's all under review. And there's talk of an emergency restitution fund for affected residents, funded by liquidating those assets. I exhaled slowly. Does that include the fake annexation paperwork? Every last bit of it, he confirmed. Your case was the thread that unraveled the whole sweater. The trial for the new charges began that December. The courtroom was filled with new faces, representatives from the state auditor, the attorney general's office, even a federal grant compliance officer. This wasn't just a community drama anymore. It was a full-blown government fraud case. Karen's new attorney, this one real but visibly uncomfortable, argued that she had been misled by her board members. But the paper trail was undeniable. Emails with her digital signature showed she had personally approved every fraudulent grant application, every illegal fund transfer, and every falsified invoice. At one point during the proceedings, the prosecution played a recorded phone call between Karen and the fake paralegal, pulled from a seized computer. Her voice was clear and unmistakable. If we can get just 5 more properties under the new jurisdiction, she said, we can apply for the second grant cycle. No one's going to check the zoning maps if the paperwork looks official. The courtroom went silent. Karen didn't look up for the rest of the day. By the end of the trial, the jury had no doubts. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to an additional 8 years in state prison, to be served consecutively with her previous sentence, with no chance of parole for at least 6. The others involved received varying sentences, some probation with heavy fines, others multiple years for their roles in the scheme. But the real victory came after the sentencing. The state announced a new oversight policy requiring all HOAs that apply for public funds to undergo annual third-party audits. They also launched a hotline for homeowners to report abuse of authority by HOA boards. The first call ever logged was from someone in a different county, reporting a board trying to charge fines for having a flagpole. Back in Maple Ridge, things were different. We didn't hold any elections or start a new board, but neighbors began working together in a way they hadn't before. A retired contractor helped repair fences damaged in a storm. A nurse down the block organized free CPR training at the community center. The veteran with the wheelchair ramp started a neighborhood watch group. One afternoon, I came home to find a small plaque nailed to the base of my mailbox. It was made of wood, carved by hand, and sealed with weatherproof resin. It read, "Here lies the reason we're free to say and oh." I never found out who made it. No one ever took credit, but it stayed there, and no one ever touched it. A few weeks later, I received a letter, not from an HOA or the county, but from a young woman in high school doing a civics project. She'd read about the case in the local paper and asked if I'd be willing to talk about how communities can stand up for themselves. I wrote back, start with the truth and end with it, too. Everything in between should be made of proof, patience, and people who don't scare easy. I folded the letter, sealed it, and walked it down to the post office. The clerk behind the counter gave me a nod as he stamped the envelope. Still waiting on the next HOA to try something? He asked with a smirk. I smiled. Nah, I think they got the message. The plaque on my mailbox isn't really about me. It's a reminder that when someone tries to take what's yours, the most powerful weapon you have is the truth, and the second most powerful is a neighbor who has your back. And they had, because from that day forward, no one in Maple Ridge ever answered to a clipboard again.